So, still going over Tender is the Flesh. This is going to require a few different videos for different topics. Um, if you did not watch the brief introduction video, I won't say brief because it was like 20 minutes. Quick rundown. That is a vast oversimplification. Tender is the Flesh is basically about a book where there is a virus that causes all animals to be toxic to humans. Humans are inedible, and animal products are inedible by humans in this story. And so the government begins to legalize and regulate the farming and processing of humans. And so there's a lot of different discussions that come about from this. And so, I mean, you can see it's not a long book, but there's so many things that it goes into. And so what we're going to do today is go over kind of the lifespan and the life of the head. Head being the terminology for an individual or individuals who are considered inhuman humans meant for processing. So this is going to be very heavy. Again, this is a fictional book, but there are some very scary things that kind of correlate to events that have happened in the real world. Not on a mass scale like this, and that was kind of an oversimplification. That was kind of a generalization, but we'll get to that. So I just kind of want to go over the lifespan because, of course, the big question when we hear about this book is, well, who gets to decide who is the consumer and who is the consumed, right? And I mean that from both a consumerism, capitalistic terminology point of view, as well as a feeding and physical consumption sort of point of view. That word plays two roles here, and this entire book really toes that line between what does it mean to be a consumer both of food and a consumer in a capitalistic society. So yeah. Today I'm just going to go over the lifespan of the head or the prey. So initially during the transition period or the pre-transition period before the government had legalized and begun to regulate the processing of particular humans, it was pretty much kind of a very scary thing where people would like whisper about like the neighbors who were being eaten in secret. And of course, marginalized communities were impacted first because in real life, in any world event, during a big transition, the marginalized communities are impacted first. So it started with people who the news would kind of not care as much if they disappeared. So that could be immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants. That would be people of color, people who were lower income or low socioeconomic status, people who didn't have jobs that were a particular status. There were also moments of consumption of opportunity. So, for example, this book goes into how the process for declaring someone deceased and funeral processes have had to change because when people died at funeral homes, like people would attack the hearses as they were being driven to the cemeteries and things like that to consume them, right? So that was the pre-transition. Post-transition, or after the regulation, right, and the farming of people, the hearses are no longer used. Cars are kind of followed to cemeteries just in case, but people are no longer like buried. Like people are cremated, and there's a whole process where people have to certify that the cremation went according to plan. They have to certify that they were a witness to it. We'll get into all that in another video. Maybe, depends. But again, during the book, the present day of the book where this is happening, it's legalized internationally in most countries, and the government has its own regulations depending on the country people are living in. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to determine, like basically, head is like reared, right? Except for people who like religiously donate their bodies. Basically, I've listed all the exceptions, but I'm going to get into that in another video. I'll do a whole video on exceptions to people aside from people who were brought up in farms. But today we're talking about the farming practices, which it's heavy. It's heavy stuff. It's not fun. It's, again, this is a horror book, so keep that in mind. If it's not your jam, this is not stuff you're going to want to hear. Yeah, so basically Marcos goes to, that's our main character, his job is to kind of go and make connections between the breeding center, the meat processing plant, different butcher shops, farmeries, tanneries, and like hunting, game reserves, things like that, right? So we're going to kind of we're going to go chronologically for the lifespan of head. We're starting with the breeding center. So in the breeding center, there's a couple different roles that are being played. Very obviously, we have the female head who are being artificially inseminated, right? So basically, the process for this is that, and there's a lot of human rights abuses very, very obviously going on here, right? There is a sterilized male head or male individual, right, who does not have rights, right? Like, he still is brought up in these same conditions. He doesn't really have power in any sort of way, but his job is to basically identify through action, not going into detail, he basically identifies women who are considered of age to, or of physique to basically be impregnated and carry a fetus to term, right? So he doesn't actually inseminate these women because, again, he is sterilized, and that would be strictly forbidden. There are very strict processes with what material can be used for insemination, and it's been like very clearly vetted, regulated. Some of the head brought up are considered first generation pure, FGP, and they get stamped, marked for it, like branded for it, the same way that you would notice like in supermarkets, it'll say like no hormones added, things like, basically things like that. Like, the people are graded essentially as meat products. So basically, because of that, from even before conception on until slaughter, they have their whole life is very regulated. So basically, women are identified for insemination. They are artificially inseminated with the considered desirable product, right? I don't really know what I can and can't say, but again, this is a video for mature readers. And once the pregnancy is verified, the embryo is given an ID number that is tracked. It is considered property in utero, right? And has that identification number unique to it in utero. So, unfortunately, we learn that impregnated head or women would frequently try to terminate their pregnancies, right? And so certain steps are taken to make it so that it is physically impossible for them to do so. I won't go into too much detail on that, but physically it becomes impossible for them to do so. We also learned that all head are unable to speak in words to each other. They have their, this is going to be kind of scary, trigger warning, their vocal cords are surgically removed so that they're unable to speak to each other. Basically, any sort of sounds or like guttural kind of noises that people make to each other. Are they mentally able to communicate? Yes, they're people, but speech is not a form of communication that is viable anymore. So anyway, these impregnated head give birth, and then those head are brought up to the age that is desired for slaughter. And that age can vary, because the same way some people prefer to eat a whole, like an adult lamb, right? Like lamb chops. Some people will prefer to eat like, I don't know the term because I don't really eat lamb, but some people eat like baby lamb for Easter or something. I don't know because I don't really do it, but like I've heard that's a thing. Or some people will eat like regular adult beef steak, and some people have like baby cow. I don't remember the word for baby cow. But yeah, so that head is brought up in the breeding center to a certain age, and then whenever it gets to the age, usually it is adulthood. Very, very rare it is not adulthood, but we do see evidence of that happening. But most of the time adulthood. So adulthood. Then from there, they go to, from the breeding center to the meat processing center. They are brought there on a transport truck. There are a few different options from here. The one very obvious part is that they are then processed as meat, and then their sections are sent to different butcher shops in the area. Okay, that's the most common, most obvious. There are a few other options, and they don't get to choose, by the way. They're picked and divvied up, and it's decided by the staff essentially working at the meat processing center. Some are also sent to a game reserve. Game meaning like prey, as in for hunting. And essentially, the same way some game reserves or hunting areas will like put animals, or like farmed ponds, right, will put fish in that area to be caught or hunted. That same thing happens in this story where we meet the owner of a game reserve who places orders, and usually it is like the more agile and lively individuals, because it prevents the hunts from being boring. And it is all very dehumanizing, and the way these people speak, you can tell that they don't view these people as people, just in their terminology, right? How I keep referring to like the head or the this, the that, and also like the way they interact and speak about and things like that. It's not, they're so not viewed as people, which is wild because it's staring them in the face that this is a person. But that's the point. So, I mean, one of many points. So, let's see. I'm looking at my notes real quick because I don't want to forget anything. Oh, real quick, I almost forgot. So the breeding farm brought up a couple of other things that I want to touch on before I go back to the game reserve and the hunting. So the breeding farm reminded me of reproductive exploitation, right? The very obvious of not being able to have a choice in reproduction, things like that, not being able to raise your child. It goes into, it just touches a hint on surrogacy, but not as much as what we'll get to with a later character that just kind of like, oh my gosh, that situation blew my mind, but we're not going to go there yet. It also touches upon like meat products in general, not just meat, because the same way that we consume cows, and some people consume cow milk. I'm an oat milk, almond milk girly, but some people consume cow milk, right? And people are consuming human milk. So some people, it's like their job to, not their job, they're not being paid, but they are forced to produce milk for consumption, right? The other thing is, it's literally a human breeding farm. And I saw very recently, I think it was 2024, maybe even 2025, I can't quite recall, but in the country of Georgia, there was a human trafficking farm, not quite like this book, but basically women were told that they were going to donate their eggs. Then once they arrived there, they were locked up. They were not allowed communication with the outside world, and their eggs were extracted without their consent, and they basically were kept in cages and trafficked for their eggs, basically. That was something real that happened in the country of Georgia very recently. So I I believe this book had been out long before that happened. Um, so I mean, clearly it's something a lot of people have thought about. There must be historical context that I'm not aware of. I would assume there's historical context I'm not aware of, very specific to that, but that's a real life connection in modern times that we can make. Okay, so let me just look real quick. Okay, so let's go to the hunting scene, right? The gambling scene. We go into that, and I think Marcos says that of all the places, and I could be wrong. No, this isn't his least favorite place. But it's one of his least favorite places. He does not like his job. He's really just doing it because his grandfather, or his father, is in assisted living, and he pays a lot of money to have his father in the best home because he wants to make sure his father is cared for by specifically nurses, not just anyone, but actual medical nurses, and also because he wants him in a secure place to make sure that nobody eats him, quite frankly. So that's why he works this horrible job, because the worst jobs pay a lot of money usually. Okay. So we go to the hunting scene where he meets the owner of the game reserve, and we learn a couple things. So so a lot of times it's like men for their athleticism. However, pregnant women are also frequently requested for the hunt because, again, just like we saw in the breeding center, these women are maternal, and they're trying to protect their unborn child. And in the particular scene where he's speaking with the owner of the game reserve directly, I wish I'd written his name down or a page number. I know I have it somewhere, but I don't have it on the specific page of notes that I'm looking at. But anyway, he's speaking with him, and he specifically says that he wants some pregnant women who are closer to like the due date, essentially, because then theoretically upon successful hunt, people can eat both the woman and unborn child. So really dark, really messed up. And at that point, Marcos has a character that is closer to him who is super pregnant. And so it just kind of hits a little harder that while he's trying to protect a pregnant individual, he's basically sending other pregnant individuals to their execution in a very horrific way where they're trying to survive. We also get into class conflicts, like social economic class conflict, kind of the price of fame and gambling, because the game reserve owner has realized that when celebrities go into, or like kind of washed up celebrities go into severe financial debt, he basically makes them an offer and says, depending on the amount or price of their debt, like if you stay on the game reserve for such and such amount of time and survive, then I wipe your debt clean, right? And he does that. And we see that there's like a rock star, like a rock singer, who actually takes him up on that offer, and he, I guess, had a little bit more debt. So he didn't have to stay a full week, but it was more than a few hours. It was 5 days, I believe, or maybe it wasn't 5 days, but I think it was 5 days. But basically, he only had a few hours left to go. It was the day he would have been able to go home when he was hunted, right? He was caught. So we kind of go into just commentary on like the price of fame, gambling addiction, like all of the vices that exist in our typical standard world, like gambling and all of the crimes against people that exist are still here. It's just that cannibalism and human farming is happening right in our faces as well in this fictional world. So we also get into racism when it comes to the hunting scene, because obviously the person who owns the game reserve is someone who's very creepy and messed up. And he actually has a lot of antique photographs in his decor that show white people hunting black people. And we know when we look at history that historically, like, hunting people of other races did happen. It's horrific. And this man is basically using that decor and then modern day trophy mounts to kind of show that humans have always been and always will be horrible to each other. His whole idea is like, well, now we don't have to pretend that we're not horrible. That's kind of his whole shtick in this, right? Is this idea that we, as humans, as animals, are horrible, and the only thing the transition did was make us less hypocritical about it, right? That's kind of his thing. And then there are some conversations that are interesting because we get into a couple of different things. So there's this one dude who is socially elite, and he's the one who hunts and kills that rock star. And so then they all sit down to lunch. And Marcus tries to get out of the lunch, but he's kind of like socially strong-armed into it. And he tries to kind of avoid any human products and just stick to like the veggies and kind of push things aside. But he is discreetly caught, and the owner of the game reserve quietly lets him know, like, hey, that's kind of rude. So then Marcos actually does take a few bites, and he's like, oh, I kind of missed this. Yeah, it's messed up. But of course, we get into certain social dynamics. So in the story, all of the hunters are kind of sitting together to consume the rock star, and they're talking about their successful day of hunting. It's very much an old boys club kind of vibe, and it's kind of them sharing and bragging about the worst parts of themselves, as what often happens in these upper elite communities, right? And there's one guy who, the hunter, who killed the rock star. We get into this concept of language as capital because he alternates between English and Spanish. And the story, it doesn't say that it takes place in Argentina, but we know for certain that it takes place in a Spanish-speaking area. Just because of location names, building names, people's names, right? Things like that. Also, the author is Argentinian, so when we compare those two things, it kind of gives a strong suggestion that if it's not taking place in Argentina, it's taking place in a fictional world with similarities to that location. So he kind of alternates between English and Spanish depending on what he's talking about, how he wants to sort of impress people. And language has capital in real world, right? In the real world, in our world, in society, because some languages are considered more classy or whatever, right? People have these biases towards certain things, and it impacts impacts how people are treated, right? It kind of corresponds with xenophobia and racism and things that we see. People have certain connotations when they hear certain languages, when they hear certain accents, even if it's subconsciously. So, but we see in this example, the hunter is using his bilingualism intentionally to try to elevate his social status. So that was very interesting to see from a linguistic standpoint. We also got into the concept of like a couple different things. Human trafficking for I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but basically sex trafficking, right? We get into that concept. We get into the concept as well of like machismo and homophobia and how those three things can sometimes interlink. They exist separately. In this specific situation, they are kind of strung together. So the hunter is talking about how he went to this well-known brothel, and it's kind of known to be a very seedy place, but he's discussing it as a place that is elite and classy, and it is a place known for servicing politicians, judges, law enforcement, the upper elites, the wealthy, and so everyone looks the other way. So that sounds pretty familiar, right? And it's kind of known for having, I guess we'll say, professional prostitutes or workers, right? However, some are there by choice, some are not. That's kind of what's implied. Well, we're told that some are not there, but it's implied that some are there. But this place is kind of seedy and not a great place, and it's unknown whether or not the women here or working there know that, but know what I'm about to say. But the hunters know and talk about how this place is different than other places because after interacting with the women, you can pay a very high fee to then consume them. So this gets really into the idea of men, like we get into the idea of men using women in every way possible, right? Just every way. That was really sad because he's bragging about this one particular woman who we later learn is not a woman. She's just a girl. She was not a professional. She was a victim. And that also gets into, again, marginalized people who are at higher risk of danger are the ones who are impacted the most and hurt the most in this society, just like in any society, those individuals are hurt the most. So he's bragging and making this story seem much different than what the another character whispering actually clarifies that the situation was. And then we also get into the idea of homophobia because basically that same guy who has this hyperfixation on like being controlling the room and showing up this guy who comes from a long line of hunters, right? He's got this whole big, I'm a big tough guy thing going on. He brags about this gorgeous blonde or whatever, who was a child. So he's bragging about all these things, and then he specifically asked for the rock stars, to be served to him. And so, again, I don't know what I can and can't say. So, basically, one of the other hunters is, like, making fun of him and is like, oh, are you a... and uses a slur, which is used against gay people. It's a homophobic slur, like, asks him that and, like, is trying to make fun of him. And he's like, he very seriously responds like, oh no, it like basically gives me like super bedroom powers, right? Like very seriously. And then the guy's like, oh, so just like really, it's really messed up. And it just goes to show like there's no decency. There's a lot of humiliation and dehumanization comes in many forms. The hunting section of the book was one of the more disturbing sections to me. The whole book is overall as a book is pretty disturbing, but there's just so much there. Okay, so going back to our initial segue. So when we're going over the lifespan of the head, one option is the meat processing plant. One option is the game reserve. Oh, after the meat processing plant, quick note, after they have been processed, the skin is sent to the tannery. Dead, like just the skin. Okay, so that's one option. Then the game reserve. After the hunt, people are consumed, like you consume one meal on the reserve. The rest is portioned and cleaned and sent home. And then it doesn't go into what happens there, but we see that some parts are often mounted as trophies, like the head is sometimes mounted as trophies. So I'm unsure, quite honestly. It doesn't say like what would happen to the other parts. We don't really learn about, beyond like head mounts, we don't learn about any other sort of taxidermy. Um, so the other option, meat processing, game reserve. Another option is some are sent to Dr. Volka's laboratory, and people don't really know what happens in the laboratory. Um, People call Dr. Volka Dr. Mengele, who was the real life horrible, like just disgusting scientist, if you could call him that, who experimented on Jews and during the Holocaust, right? And so the fact that this individual is, the fact that this character is called Dr. Mengele, behind her back by her own staff that she hires, is telling about the kinds of experiments she's running, and the way that she treats people. And that is where Marcos says is his least favorite place to go. I will say, basically, reading that section didn't disturb me. There were things I made note of, but it wasn't as disturbing as some other sections. It wasn't pleasant, but I think the hunting, for whatever reason, it may be my own personal, my own personal exposures, whatever, but like the hunting scene impacted me more, and I guess was heavier to me. But something interesting that I noticed about Dr. Volka's lab is she basically, Marcos goes there and he should just be able to take the order of the specimens people she needs for the experiments and then go. But instead, every time she insists on taking him through a walking tour, she says that she thoroughly explains what she's going to do, what she's using different specimens or people for, then he'll better understand why she needs things specified a certain way. He really doesn't care and hates it. And she says that's why she brings him on a tour and like shows him what's going on. But realistically, Marcos and myself kind of believe it's more so to brag, because why, right? But also I'm biased because I don't like her as a character. One thing I noticed is she, in general, in real life, being a woman in STEM comes with a lot of challenges, right? And I've noticed that there are sometimes individuals who treat their female staff worse, because it's kind of this mindset of like, once they achieve power, it's kind of this mindset of like, well, I had to suffer and pay my dues, so now you do too. So, like Dr. Volka's character, for existence, she's like, I chose not to have children to advance my career, this, that, the other, which is fine. And many people make that choice. If people feel they don't have a choice and they have to make those sacrifices, that's sad. But if some people are like, yeah, this is a sacrifice I want to make, do your thing, do your science stuff. I mean, not in the context of human experimentation, but in general, right? When we're talking about like women in STEM. But Marcos notes, like, if her female staff were to choose to have a family while working in the laboratory, she would look down on them. And I have seen kind of examples of that in real life, with women in business, not necessarily STEM, but in business. And I think that's something we kind of got to call out, is like, yeah, I get it, it's hard, but if you go through things and you're a trailblazer to, mark that initial path, why would you want other women to suffer because you suffered? Shouldn't you say, wow, I had to face all these obstacles. I hope it was so that other women who follow in my footsteps don't have to face obstacles. So, I don't know. I think it just goes to kind of show the narcissism of her as a character. And let's not forget, she, of course, is experimenting on men and women. So when we go into, like, first off, human experimentation is just messed up, right? I'm not saying it's better when it's against men, but it's just, like, because she makes being a woman in STEM her thing so much, because that's so much part of her being like that's her thing, right? So if that's going to be your thing, you got to have the goods to back it up, right? Like you can't pick and choose when certain identifiers are convenient. So yeah, so that's kind of her thing. And ultimately, like, Marcos, this is towards the end of the book where people are like, oh, you've been seeming kind of different. Like, what's going on with you? And he's had it by this point. So he's just rude to her. And at one point, she's, like, really rude to her staff and is like, oh, like, everyone here is incompetent. And he's like, well, you hire them. And then she basically is like, well, you should just go. And so he does. Like, he leaves. So that's interesting. Marcos, his character development as a whole throughout the story, development, regression, or with Marcos, I don't know if it's that he develops and then has a regression, or that we think that he progresses and has a regression, but in reality he was the same person the whole time and we were fooled. I haven't decided yet. I'm still deciding my thoughts on that, and maybe I'll never decide. Maybe it's like, these are the two options, these are the reasons why these two options exist. But anyway, okay. So ultimately, we've gone over the options of like the breeding centers, theoretically where things start. Then at the meat processing plant, they're either sectioned off to the game reserve or the laboratory, or they are processed, right? And then the spoon sent to the tannery. That was a really freaky part of the book. I didn't like that. So after the laboratory, it's not clear what happens to people when they die there. It's not clear. They don't directly state in the book. One thing that Marcos notes, there's several times throughout the book that give suggestions that the animals never had a virus, right? Like, and people who say that openly, at first, people who said it openly were arrested and this and that, but the opinion has been suppressed so much that now when people say it, they're just viewed as a conspiracy theorist, and people call them crazy and yada yada, you know, all that. But there's several moments throughout the book where it's not even directly stated like, oh, this happens, this might mean it's fake. Like, no, that's for you, the reader, to piece together, right? Like, we learn that there's a couple direct instances, but then there's like more indirects. Like, for example, there's Marcos's sister Marissa. She has a cockroach infestation in her house, and I've been blessed to not live in a situation where there are cockroaches, but my understanding is that you can't live with them and not know that they're there, right? So, if she believes in the virus, why hasn't she moved? Why is she not freaking out? Also, my understanding is that if someone has cockroaches, all the surrounding houses will end up getting them, right? So none of the neighbors are moving or freaking out. There are a few other scenes as well that indicate that more people than not don't believe in a virus, but they're just kind of going along with emotions because they've been so programmed to. This has been their norm for so long, they don't really know how to break it. The other thing is, I think a lot of people can't bear to think about, well, what if it's not? Because then they have to reconcile with the actions that they've committed, the things that they have done. What was I going to say? There are also some people who are considered not fit for processing, the lab, or the game reserve, and those individuals are still, they basically are given to an outcast, marginalized community who lives outside of like government watch, government norms. They're called the scavengers. That's a whole other situation. But yeah. Oh, and some individuals, towards the end of the book, we're learning that the breeding farm and the meat processing plant are selling like individual head to wealthy households who may want to kind of self raise. Like, some people may have chicken coops, right? And that gets really messy and sad, and only the elites can afford it, and it becomes like a trend to eat things certain ways. And yeah, so it's all really dark. But that's kind of what the lifespan is. Those are the things that can be expected um, for the head or the individuals who are farmed. Um, Basically, they are born in the breeding center. They will either spend their lives in the breeding center working there, or they will go to be processed for food, or they will be sent to a lab and experiments will be performed on them in the name of safety. Um, or they'll be sent to the game reserve for entertainment, which again, that kind of goes back to what I initially said, which is like, even if hypothetically, theoretically, people had to eat people, right? Like, let's say they could not be vegan or vegetarian. Like, let's pretend that they have to medically. You don't have to hunt people for fun. You don't have to wear purses that are made of people. Like, you don't, there's, like, first off, there's not a need. But if we go to need versus not need, you certainly don't need accessories and you don't need sports made out of the situation. So yeah, this book takes dehumanization to the next level. Oh, I remembered the laboratory. So while he's touring the lab, Marcos notes that there are animals locked in cages in the laboratory. And he's like, I find it odd because everyone's talking about how these labs get so much money and everyone has all these awards, but nobody has come up with a cure for this alleged virus. And like the Dr. Volka, she like changes the subject. And yeah, Marcos believes it's to make it look like they're searching for a cure when they're not, because allegedly all these labs are making money to look for a cure for a fake virus. Yeah. So, very interesting book. A lot of heavy stuff. It's a lot of sad stuff. But again, if you are looking for something that is not an easy read, that is a little bit heavy, that will make you think, that's your book. Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basarica. And I read it in English, and the translator was Sarah Moses. So that's it. And I think in future videos, I will kind of explore Marcos as a character and whether or not he develops, or we as a reader just kind of learn more about who he actually is. I do want to make an entire I do want to make an entire video about Marcos and Jasmine's dynamic, but I want to do a little more research and educate myself about a few things first before I take on something that serious and that heavy. So that's it.